Shalom Lekulam. Hello, everybody. My name is Paul Gross. I'm a senior fellow here at the Menachem Begin Heritage Center in Jerusalem. It's a great pleasure to welcome you here for the first in this exciting new series that we're doing with the Jerusalem Institute, the Strategy and Security, the JISS. The events of the past 10 days have overtaken us somewhat, and as such, we've changed the topic, as I'm sure you'll understand, for this opening talk. Fortunately, we'd already scheduled the perfect speaker to speak about this topic. I'm sure you'll understand the importance of addressing it at this point. I think many people on this Zoom will have a lot of questions, a lot of concerns, and hopefully those will be, at least some of them, will be addressed by our guest, and he will speak and answer some of my questions, and then we can go to some of your questions, which you can enter into the chat at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to those questions midway through the hour. Okay, so it's my great pleasure and honor to introduce Professor Efraim Inbar, the president of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. He was previously the founding director of the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies, a position he held for 23 years. He was a professor of political studies at Bar-Ilan University. He's also been a visiting professor at Georgetown, Johns Hopkins, and Boston universities, a visiting scholar at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, a Manfred Warner NATO fellow, and a visiting fellow at the International Institute for Strategic Studies in London. He was president of the Israel Association of International Studies, a member of the Political Strategic Committee of the National Planning Council, and chairman of the National Security Curriculum Committee in the Ministry of Education. He's authored 5 books, perhaps most pertinently for the topic we're going to be discussing, Israel's national security issues and challenges since the Yom Kippur War, a war which has been alluded to quite a lot in recent days. Professor Inbar, firstly, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. And this wasn't the topic we'd originally chosen, and this was certainly not the reason we would ever have imagined having to discuss it. But here we are, some 10 days after the atrocities of 7th of October. We'll get to some specifics and we'll get to other questions. But firstly, if you could just lay out for us your thoughts, your analysis of what happened, why and where we are now.
Shalom from Jerusalem to everybody. I want first to underscore the importance of this war. We took a terrible beating 10 days ago, totally unexpected. For the first time since Independence War, a group of settlements within Israel was conquered by Hamas, by terrorists. And this is an important precedent. Also, we should be aware of the magnitude of our losses. We have already probably more than 1,300 dead, close to 4,000 wounded during the first days of the war. And we should be aware that it was a terrible blow to one of the most important elements in our national security equation, deterrence. We lost deterrence. The pictures coming from the Gaza border, the kidnapped soldiers, the kidnapped civilians, the destruction and the barbarity of Hamas is seen not only on the Western screens and the Western media, but also in the Middle East. And some people in the Middle East cherish those views. In the Middle East, if you are not strong, you will not survive. Basically, Israel in this war has to restore deterrence in order to be able to survive in this tough region. It is extremely important that we, at the end of the war, whatever time it takes, we are seen as victorious. And this is a condition for our continuous existence in this part of the world. We have to exact a high price from our enemies. This is the language Middle Easterns are speaking. Brute force is better political currency than diplomacy, nice words, brotherly love. And this must be understood. Therefore, to a great extent, this is a war for our existence. The goal of the war, as enunciated by the government and also by the military, is the eradication of Hamas military capabilities. What does it mean? We are after the leadership of Hamas. We are after the terrorists of Hamas. Our Air Force chief said we have a full list of those that participated in the attack 10 days ago and will settle the record. We have to go from house to house, collect weapons. We have to go find the missiles, destroy them. We have to go and find the factories that produce the weapons and make sure that Hamas, as a military unit, is without any capabilities to harm us. Hamas will not die. It's impossible to destroy the idea that is popular among many in the Middle East, that Israel should be destroyed, that Israel is not a legitimate actor in the Middle East. Don't forget, Hamas is popular. If we take a look at the recent poll in September of the Palestinians, taken by an honest pollster, Khalil Shkaki, over 60% support Hamas. Unfortunately, Hamas is a well-rooted idea. The destruction of the Jewish state is a well-rooted idea in the Palestinian political body. So what we can do is to destroy their capabilities to harm us. C'est tout. Also, we, in contrast to the Americans, have no desire whatsoever to implant democracy. We are very realistic in what we can do and what can be done with military force. This goal requires a ground operation, which is a complicated mission, particularly in a densely populated area like Gaza, in an urban area. And Israeli soldiers do train for such a scenario. We built in the Negev a village, a Hamas area, like in Gaza, in order for our soldiers to know how to fight in this type of environment, which is risky. It's not an open area in which our tanks are running ahead. No, it's very difficult. And what the Air Force is doing now is try to flatten some of those areas, to destroy the openings of the tunnels, to make it easier for the ground force to enter the area and to conquer it. It's going to be a lengthy operation. The IDF is talking about weeks of fighting. And after those weeks are over, we'll have to stay for a long period in order to clean Gaza of Hamas military capabilities. A few words about Iran. And I must express my disappointment at the American government position. The US, the president, and many senior officials have embraced Israel. We see Americans pouring support to Israel. But it is very troublesome that they ignore the role of Iran. Actually, Secretary of State Blinken, despite growing evidence that Iran is involved, refuses to accept, to mention Iranian role. And we shouldn't forget, Hamas is funded by Iran. It gets its training in Iran or from Iranians. It gets its missile technology from Iran. And Hamas is called scum of earth, inhuman beings. What about their sponsor? So I think that the Americans still have a way to go to identify who are the bad guys in the Middle East. Iran is the octopus, and it has many branches. Hamas is one of them. Hezbollah is another one. They are in Iraq, they are in Syria, they are in Yemen. And eventually, Iran has to be dealt with. Will we have a multi-war front? Of course, I don't know. But it is a possibility. It is a possibility that Hezbollah, which has started already to shoot at Israel, will escalate its attacks. It depends on the calculation in Tehran. If Tehran will see those events as an opportunity to implement its population-centric strategy, which hopes to weaken the spirit of the Israelis, to make them leave, they may join the fray. We really don't know what is the calculation in Tehran. I must say that in August, the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security issued a warning to the Israeli government about an impending war because we detected an erosion in Israel's deterrence. This deterrence was partly eroded due to the domestic clashes in Israel. It's unquestionable. And I don't want to take sides in the debate, but unquestionably, those debates have weakened the perception of a strong Israel. The only light in the situation is the Israeli spirit. Israelis are in a gloomy mood because what they have seen, what they've heard. Personally, I've refused to take a look at the picture. I don't want my view to be contaminated by feelings. But they were shocked. At the same time, we are determined to go on and fight to the end. We see in the units, in the reserve units, over 100% reporting to duty. This means that people that were discharged from reserve are coming back and volunteering. Many of you probably see the lines at El Al, trying to mount an airplane to come back and fight here. Young reservists who are on vacation, or students, or whatever. They come back to fight. And Israelis have military experience. They know that the war is dangerous. It's not just bravado. You can lose your life. You can become maimed. And still they are coming. The spirit in the country is great. This is the source of our strength. In the international arena, Israel enjoys much support, particularly in the civilized world, in the Western countries. I mentioned the support of the United States, sent weapons. They are sending 2 air carriers. One of them is already in the region, partly to be able to evacuate American citizens that try maybe to deter Iran. I'm not sure how successful they will be. At the same time, we hear exaggerated concerns about the humanitarian situation. Demands for a humanitarian corridor, not matched by demands to supply the names of the kidnapped. Those are the American highest authorities. And the political clock is at work. I'm afraid that the IDF will not have all the time it needs in order to complete its mission. And there will be international pressure, which is not so important to us, but American pressure is to stop fighting. So we are in an uneasy situation. Hopefully, the IDF will do the job. And at the end of the war, everybody will understand that you cannot harm Israel without paying a heavy price. I'll stop here, and I'm ready to take questions.
Okay, I want to follow up on, firstly, thank you very much for that analysis. That's, I think, very useful and helpful for people to get that perspective. You said a couple of times about the importance, the critical importance of restoring deterrence, and the need for, I think the term you used was brute force. That's the language that the Middle East understands. And then you went on to say that the IDF may not get the time because of American pressure. And I wonder whether could you be more specific in what you think? How different do you think this needs to be to how Israel has operated in Gaza in the past? Because we often hear about how Israel, for example, gives warnings to civilians to leave through text messages and dropping leaflets. There's the famous knock on the roof where an empty shell is dropped on a building to alert civilians to leave. My sense is that those things are not going to be so common in this conflict, but you'll tell me if I'm wrong or right. And are we and in terms of the humanitarian demands by the international community, is there a distinction? Is there a difference between Israel not providing electricity and water and other things, and Israel not allowing others to provide? So for example, having some corridor or whatever allowing civilians to get humanitarian aid through Rafah or something. What's your take on that?
I don't think that Israel has any moral duty,
okay,
whatsoever, to supply water, energy, food to the enemy. Today, it became clear that some of the stuff that was provided to the Gazans was taken by Hamas.
Yeah.
Which is a phenomenon that we know from other places where there are humanitarian missions, and the guys with the guns take the food. So we should not kid ourselves that any humanitarian support for the Gazan population is not going to reach Hamas. I don't remember that during World War II, the United States was very concerned about the fate of the children of the Nazis. I think that we should not be over moral. People that support Hamas have to suffer. We shouldn't forget that Hamas, a popular movement, was elected in democratic elections to run the Palestinian Authority. I have no objection if others supply via Egypt, that's fine. I think that demanding of us
right
to supply to our enemies is totally immoral. It's not a moral demand.
Right.
In terms of use of force, I agree with you that will probably remove some of the limitations we imposed upon ourselves beyond the demands of the international law.
Yeah.
This is not necessary.
Right. Just I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'll turn to questions from the audience. You mentioned, of course, the possibility of Hezbollah entering the fray. Obviously, as you said, none of us are prophets. We don't know. And you said that it depends on the calculations of the Iranian patrons of Hezbollah. Is there a possibility that, in your view, that Iran would wish Hezbollah to get involved, but Hezbollah would be deterred by, for example, Israeli plus American threats of massive force against Lebanon?
I think we should realize that Hezbollah is an organization that is totally subservient to its masters in Tehran. I don't think that the leaders of Hezbollah have great freedom of action. I might be wrong. If I'm wrong, they may have a more complex set of factors in their decision making. And obviously, they may be reluctant to bring Beirut and parts of Lebanon to a level of destruction they've not seen before. I'm not sure Tehran, Iranians care how Beirut looks. We shouldn't forget also that Iranians are Persians, Hezbollah are Arabs, and Iranians may decide to fight to the last Arab. So I'm not sure what will happen, but Iran at a certain point may decide to allow Hezbollah to escalate in order to ease the pressure on Hamas in Gaza. Or alternative, they may decide, I think it would be a misperception on their part, that the moment is right for a multi-front attack, not only the north and the south, but also some kind of rebellion, intifada in the West Bank, as well as civil disorder among Israeli Arabs. If this is their calculation, we may see greater involvement.
Okay, thank you. Okay, there's a lot of questions. I can't promise to get through all of them, but I'll try and put as many as I can to you. So there were a few questions about the future of Gaza. Barry asked about a post-Hamas Gaza. Konstantinos raised the question as to whether Fatah, the PA, effectively could take over Gaza again in coordination with Israel. And then Shmuel posed the question about a reoccupation, Israeli taking full control over Gaza again, as in pre-disengagement, pre-2005. What are your thoughts?
Well, there are several scenarios possible. It's quite clear that Israelis have no appetite to stay in Gaza and administer Gaza. I don't see many countries that are willing to accept Gazans. So what are the possibilities? One, we get out and there is chaos. There is a Somalia-type situation. Another possibility is, of course, what was mentioned, to turn Gaza to the PA, the Palestinian Authority. And of course, we all know that the Palestinian Authority hardly controls the West Bank. The Palestinian Authority has failed in the most basic requirement of a state, monopoly over use of force.
Yeah.
So if they cannot manage in West Bank, will they be able to manage in Gaza? It's a question. There is another possibility of having maybe some kind of international regime after we pacified the region. I'm not sure I see many volunteers to come to Gaza and to police Gaza and to try to make Gaza a Singapore. What is most important for us is to make clear to everybody that Israel maintains freedom of action, freedom of military action. And probably what we'll see, whatever type of situation will rise there, will continue to mow the grass. As I mentioned, Hamas may come back. It's an idea that has followers. And with time, they may gain more capabilities. And we have to go in, mow the grass, and go home. One of the problems I think we didn't mow the grass enough. And this is why we allowed Gaza to grow such military capabilities. We were hostages of a misconception, quiet for quiet. Quiet for quiet allowed Gazans to arm themselves, to build tremendous military capabilities that we have seen. So whatever happens there, we need the freedom of military action to come in and take care of the bad guys.
Okay. Obviously, Iran has been mentioned a lot. It's the most important external actor in this whole story. But there were a couple of questions about Qatar as a country that has funded Hamas, that I think hosts various Hamas leaders. Should there be, in your view, there were a couple of questions about this. Should there be, in your view, some kind of sanction on Qatar as a result of this? But now that Hamas has shown itself to be certainly what I think Israelis thought of it as anyway, but that the rest of the world can see it as a sort of ISIS type jihadist organization, that it should be treated in the same way, and its sponsors should be treated as sponsors of ISIS would be treated. What's your take on that?
I think this is an American fault. Right. Qatar is hiding behind the United States. The United States has serious interests in Qatar, particularly a huge airbase, Al Ubaid. But this base with American troops is very close to Hamas headquarters, to where Hamas leaders are spending their time and are leading the organization. So again, American policy is to be changed vis-a-vis Qatar. Qatar is declared by the Americans as a non-NATO ally. Is this a non-NATO ally? Israel? I think Americans should do some soul searching about how they treat Qatar. Don't forget, Qatar is also the mouthpiece of the most extreme Islamist messages that go via Al Jazeera, the most popular TV station in the Arab world, which is very anti-American.
Yeah. There was a question about you talked about Israeli solidarity and the resolve of the Israeli people, which I think everyone, our audience here is divided between people living in Israel and outside Israel, and I think that certainly those living in Israel would agree with you, having seen the way that the country's responded, the people have responded in the last 10 days. But what about the trust in the security services, in the military, in the Shabak? Is that, how do you think that's been fundamentally damaged? How can it be? Will it take a long time to be rebuilt, in your view? I'm wondering also, given that you wrote a book on the Yom Kippur War, whether you can make some analogies to that, where I think the government was more blamed, right, than the security services.
Of course, at the end of the Yom Kippur War, the trust of the people in the government and the military establishment was shattered.
Yeah.
So it's already a thing of the past, and it's a fact that the IDF is the most trusted institution in Israel. But the surprise, of course, again, points out to its deficiencies. This is a problem. And of course, if we are victorious, then some of the trust will be restored towards the army. The fate of the political level, I think it's different. The political level, which was attacked already before, since January, is a continuous problem. And we will not have elections immediately after. Well, they are not scheduled any elections. But the current leadership is, in the eyes of many Israelis, first of all, to be blamed for the fiasco we experienced 10 days ago, and must go. I think that if they would have had, if election would be held today, will not have the same result.
Yeah,
it's quite clear. There is another aspect which is troubling for many, that many in the current government, and particularly the Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox, and even members of the religious Zionists, didn't really serve in the military. This government had a problem of legitimacy because of that, even before the war. So, particularly its intention to bring about a law that will allow most of the ultra-Orthodox population not to go into the military was problematic before the war and after the war. If this government continues with it, there will be barricades in the streets. This is not something the Israelis that are spilling their blood are ready to accept.
Right.
So this government is politically in trouble, and we'll see what happens.
Okay, thank you. There's a question by Milton asks about the reliance on high tech in the military, and excuse me, whether that bears some responsibility. Is there some can blame be laid at the door of military leaders, whether the current general staff or previous recent general staff who maybe changed the orientation of the IDF towards a more high tech direction, and perhaps neglected other more traditional forms of training? Is that a legitimate criticism or not so much?
First of all, technology is a good thing if it's used correctly, and if it is implemented in tandem with other elements in the use of force. I think that Israel, for the past 4 decades at least, has overemphasized technology. For example, it relied on Air Force and intelligence rather than on the land forces. And of course, the ones that questioned me on this issue was aware that our high-tech technology was blinded with low-tech means. So you have to find the right mix. Technology in itself can be a force multiplier. But again, it has to be integrated into a military doctrine that does not rely exclusively on technology.
Okay. I want to just clarify something. You mentioned when you talked about the government and how the ultra-Orthodox are not serving in the army, and you also said some members of the religious Zionist party also. Someone interpreted that as a comment about religious Zionists generally, and that, of course, that's not the case. Religious Zionists do serve in the army at very high levels in combat units. And clearly, you were talking about the political party called the Religious Zionist Party.
Yes.
Right. Let's just clarification.
And to make it perfectly clear, the people that see me on screen, I have a yarmulke on my head, and I'm part of the religious Zionist crowd. I served in the paratroopers. My son is now on the front as a paratrooper reservist, and I'm sure many know that a large part of the junior officers in the Israeli military are come from the religious Zionist sector.
Right, right. Yeah, it was a reference to the political party that calls itself Religious Zionist Party. Okay. So you went in. You talked about the specifics in your view of what Israel needs to do, and you talked about going house to house. This very painstaking, almost certainly long enduring campaign. Is there a precedent? Is it similar to Operation Defensive Shield in the Second Intifada in places like Jenin? Is this an unprecedented type of operation, or have we seen this before? Has Israel successfully implemented this kind of ground operation before?
I think the comparison to Defensive Shield is correct. In 2002, we decided exactly to do a similar operation. Now, the big difference is that nowadays we are facing a much better armed enemy, a much higher motivated enemy than in 2002. And this is a big difference. Also, another difference is that Hamas, in contrast to Defensive Shield operation, is preparing exactly for this scenario. In 2002, the general understanding among the Palestinians, but also among many Israelis, that the refugee camps are not to be touched. They felt very secure there. Hamas, in contrast, understands that Israel can go in and look for them, and they are preparing for it. Another difference is, of course, the Iranian support.
Yeah.
The Iranians were not active in 2002. Very little. Nowadays, we have an organization that much of its military doctrine has been written by Iranians. So, unfortunately, this time it's going to be more difficult than in 2002.
Right. There were a couple of questions about the separation between Israel and Gaza. So Jacqueline asks, what sort of barrier must now be used, or perhaps after the war could be used to separate Israel from Gaza? Because the barrier that was there, it turns out, didn't work, at least in the circumstances of October 7th. Barry asks, why aren't there mines in a sort of no man's land between Gaza and Israel? I'll just throw in as well, I think it was Gideon Saar, who recently joined the government, of course, in Benny Gantz's party, talking about having a sort of buffer zone of a few kilometers deep into Gaza, which would be controlled by Israel. What are your views on that?
I think I've written it in the past. I made it quite clear to everybody that was willing to listen. There is no effective barrier without a killing zone. Simple. You have to make sure that in the area before, ahead of the barrier, anybody that enters, it can be 1 kilometer, it can be 1.5 kilometers, he risks his life. And we shoot to kill. I know it doesn't sound very good in Western ears, but we live in the Middle East. And people should know that they should not get close to the barrier. About a year ago, we've seen a very unfortunate event when a terrorist came to an opening in the wall, and shot one of the soldiers. This should not happen. We have to be ruthless in this respect. And even if there is no great understanding for it in some countries, this is what must be done, a killing zone. I'm not sure how wide it should be, but this should be clear. About mines, Israel built a barrier along the border and didn't want to infringe upon the territorial integrity of Hamas, so they didn't put any mines on the other side of the wall. I think we don't have to be, there is a Jewish term for it, Feinschmeckers.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I'm just looking at the some of the questions here. Very straightforward question from Milton. He says, is Israel able, in your view, to fight a 2-front or 3-front war? I assume with a 3rd front he means in the West Bank. But a 2 or 3-front war, is Israel capable, in your view?
Israel has a too small army for its challenges. That should be clear. We don't have enough soldiers, combat soldiers. If we go into Lebanon, we don't have enough soldiers to police the villages. So we cannot fight at the same time a multi-front war. But we can fight one front, defend the other sectors, and after we achieve decision on one front, we move the forces to another front, a gradual approach. This we can do. America, United States, had once a doctrine of 2.5 fronts. 2 fronts. Unfortunately, we are not America. And we don't have enough soldiers, partly because the ultra-Orthodox, a growing sector in Israeli society, are not enlisted. And I think this might change after the war. I don't know exactly how, but it's clear. We say in Israel, השמיכה קצרה. What would be the English translation? The blanket is too small.
Yes, yeah.
The blanket is too small, and we cannot cover all our fronts.
Right.
We don't have enough soldiers. Also, Israel neglected its reserve units. Many of the reserve units did not train for years. Many were discharged because, according to the military doctrine, we don't need them. We need intelligence and air force. And tanks, tank formations were dismantled, despite the fact that we can produce the best tank in the world. Part of what is happening is our own doing. It's not only the enemy. We make mistakes, and we should take responsibility for those mistakes.
That leads me on to there were a couple of questions about the nature of the misconception that led to the mistakes or the whatever it was. So David asks whether there was some level of hubris, of arrogance, perhaps similar to 73, a kind of Yeh Beseder mentality. And Esther asks whether we maybe were failed to understand the Arab mentality in some way. Do you think either of those are fair criticisms?
Of course, we had a conception. You cannot be without a conception. Let's be frank about it. You always have a conception. You must have some kind of mechanism in order to filter the facts that are coming. So you cannot live without a conception. The conception that failed us was that Hamas is deterred. Many believed, including my colleague, General Yaakov Amidror, who was head of intelligence research. He was the national security advisor of Netanyahu, and he admitted openly he made a mistake. He thought that Hamas, because it is a governing body, not only a terrorist organization, will show some responsibilities toward the people of Gaza. And they want to live well. So let them allow them to come to work in Israel, to improve their standard of living. This is liberal nonsense. There is no connection whatsoever, no correlation between standard of living and terrorism. India is very poor. Do they have more terrorists than other countries? No. Do we see in very poor countries in Africa more terrorism than in other countries? No, there is no correlation. But we believe that there is a correlation, that they want to live well. This is a Western notion.
Yeah.
That is foreign to Hamas thinking. They are ready to suffer for the cause. Also, I think that some of our intelligence officers are secular, and they don't understand the power of religion. Hamas is a religious organization. To have God on your side, nothing can be more powerful. And God will eventually prevail. So they have patience, and they are ready to suffer. Things which Westerners do not always associate with. And I believe this was part of it. I'm sure that after the war, we'll investigate the intelligence failure. We'll try to learn lessons. But I can tell you, there is no way for a foolproof intelligence that with no surprise. We are human beings. We have weaknesses, and surprise is always looming somewhere there in the horizon.
Right. We'll do one last question. So hour is almost up. There are a couple of questions about whether whether this might be a good time to actually directly attack Iran, or another question about preemptively striking Hezbollah.
I've been on the record for several years since 2003, actually, for attacking Iran. Unfortunately, the government didn't listen to it. And in recent years, we neglected this option. We have to be honest. We had too many elections. We neglected this option. So I'm not sure we are now in a position with the capability to attack Iran. It takes time to prepare for such a scenario. I am also on record for a preemptive strike against Hezbollah. A preemptive strike on Hezbollah has several advantages. First of all, a successful one, of course. It restores deterrence.
Yeah.
It also weakens Iran, because Iran keeps Hezbollah as a tool to exact a price from Israel in case of an attack on Iran. I've written, the road to Natanz goes via Beirut. I think also an attack on Hezbollah is necessary in order to preserve the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords are predicated on a strong Israel that is willing to confront Iran, particularly when America is seen as weak and leaving the region. For many Arabs, America is a paper tiger. And Israel is viewed differently. We have to keep this image. This is how I started our discussion. We have to keep the image of a strong, determined Israel. Without that, we have no existence in this region.
Okay, that I think is a very useful summing up of what I think has been the overriding message of what you've told us this evening. I want to thank you very much, Professor Inbar, for talking about what, again, not what we scheduled, not what we intended to talk about, but what we have had to talk about as a result of the events of October 7th. You've given us a lot to think about. I'm sure you've challenged some people's preconceptions. That's, I think, also important in this situation. And I want to thank you very, very much for such an informative and insightful analysis. I want to invite our audience to join us again in 2 weeks' time. Also on Monday, it'll be the 30th of October. We'll be joined by Professor Inbar's colleague, Professor Hillel Frisch, where he'll be talking about the future of the Palestinian Authority, which I think might also have a slightly different complexion than it did when we originally planned it. Yeah, you should find us on our website, also on the website of the JISS. I encourage everyone to read the JISS. It has a fantastic English website with lots of fantastic analysis and articles. Today's address from Professor Inbar was a great advert for that, I think. And if you're not on my mailing list, then you can join by emailing me, paulg@begincentre.org.il. Thank you very much, everyone. For those of you in Israel, stay safe, get to your shelters in time, and I hope in 2 weeks' time we'll be in a more things will be looking more positive. No promises, of course, no guarantees, but let's all hope and pray for the best. Thank you, everyone, and thank you again, Professor Inbar.
Belongs to everybody.
Bye.